Hi there and welcome to the channel, and this video, which will constitute my February wrap, not easy to say, in which I reflect on both the quantity and the quality of the books I read this month. Now in terms of numbers, it was a great month. I read 11 books, but before I come on to speaking about those, just a brief item of channel news. The subscriber count has grown by a whopping 26% in the last 2 months, and my rough calculations indicate that the channel will hit 1 million subscribers in a mere 416 years. Terribly exciting news. Okay, now let's move on to the main event, the books. The first thing I did this month was polish off this, Karenina by Tolstoy, a magnificent novel. My favourite characters were Oblonsky, followed by Levin and Kitty. However, I couldn't warm to the titular Anna, her grey bureaucrat of a husband, whose name I can't recall, or her dashing young lover, Count Vronsky. I rather felt that these extremely selfish characters simply deserved one another. Okay, moving on, we have another hardback. It's Edgar Allan Poe with the complete stories. All the classics are here: The Pit and the Pendulum, The Telltale Heart, The Purloined Letter, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Mask of the Red Death. However, what I found gripping was some of the minor pieces. I'm just going to read you the titles of 5 or so, which are absolutely worth your time. I'll need the glasses for this. Give me a second. Okay, so let me see. Oh yes, Loss of Breath. Very funny indeed. Then Metzengerstein. This is rather similar to Heinrich von Kleist. No higher praise is possible. Then The Unparalleled Adventure of One Hans Fall. Absolutely wonderful. William Wilson. Equally good. And finally, King Pest, set in a plague-ridden London. Absolutely wonderful again. So there's much more to discover in Poe than simply his best-known stories. Now, moving on, we have Daniel Paul Schreber's Memoirs of My Nervous Illness. This book was written by a German jurist around the turn of the 20th century and is a landmark account of mental illness. And I'll just read you a passage where he's describing how his bodily integrity was damaged by thousands of little men. These tiny human shapes of only a few millimeters in size made mischief on all parts of my body, both inside and on the surface. Those occupied with the opening and closing of the eyes stood above the eyes and the eyebrows, and there pulled the eyelids up or down as they pleased with fine filaments like cobwebs. Whenever I showed signs of being unwilling to allow my eyelids to be pulled up and down and actually opposed it, the little men became annoyed and expressed this by calling me wretch. If I wiped them off my eyes with a sponge, the effect was only temporary. Each time the little men were set down afresh. Other little men were assembled almost continuously on my head in great number. They were called little devils. They literally walked around on my head, curiously nosing about to see whether any new destruction had taken place. What a magnificent book. Okay, moving on, we have 4 sci-fi novels, the first 3 of which are by the same author, H.G. Wells. First of these is The Time Machine. I don't have my physical copy to hand, having left it at school, but I do have The Invisible Man and the best of the 3, The War of the Worlds. I've made a review of these 3 novels. I kind of bundled them together, so if you want to know more about them, you can check that out. The 4th of them was this. Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation has a strong Gothic element. It was pretty good. Some parts were clumsily written while others were gripping, and I suppose my chief complaint is it didn't exploit its wonderful premise as much as it might have. It did remind me in many ways of J.G. Ballard's superb The Unlimited Dream Company. So if you have read this, but not this, you might want to give that a go. Okay, moving on, we have Gothic fiction. Penguin Classic, 3 Gothic novels. I read just the first of these. Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto from 1765. Only 100 pages or so long, but quite a deep read. It's written in an archaic style. It was pretty good, but it didn't dislodge my favourite Gothic novel from its perch. What is that? Of course, it's Matthew Lewis's The Monk. So if you haven't read The Monk, read this first, and if you're still hungry for more Gothic fiction from the first wave, The Castle of Otranto and Vathek are here. Next we have an illness memoir, Insane by Michael John Schumer. This is by a young man who had bipolar disorder, and this is an intriguing account of his experience of a number of manic episodes. And the narrative strategy is fascinating. He has essentially 2 chapters covering the same events. He'll firstly have his account written while he was still manic, and then another chapter reviewing what he wrote and supplying additional context or contradicting what he wrote in his manic state. That made it quite an intriguing read. Okay, it's self-published on Amazon, so if you're interested, I'll put the link in the description. Then we have early American Gothic fiction. It's Charles Brockden Brown with his Wieland and Memoirs of Carwin the Biloquist. A Biloquist is a ventriloquist, and this is the story that I read for one of my classes. It's really good. He uses predominantly Latin diction. It's very deep and slow, and it's based upon the picaresque genre, but it employs all these delaying tactics that generate a huge amount of suspense. It's rather similar in some respects to Caleb Williams by William Godwin, and Charles Brown was a huge admirer of William Godwin. I'd also recommend, by the same author, his Edgar Huntley, or Memoirs of a Sleepwalker. This has the distinction of being the first Gothic novel set almost entirely on the North American continent. Okay, so that concludes all the physical books I read in February. I just have one more to talk about, which I read in PDF format. This was Enid Starkie's Petrus Borel, the Lycanthrope, a biography of Borel, a French writer active at the time of the July Revolution of 1830, who counted Gerard de Nerval and Victor Hugo among his friends. He enjoyed 5 or 6 years of literary fame before rather fading from view, first retreating to the countryside and then leaving France altogether and ending his days as a colonial administrator in Algeria. However, the first section of this book, where he's at the peak of his powers, is the best. It's hugely enjoyable, and I just want to read you this passage about how the dandies like to travel. Fashion required that the dandy should drive his own car, the ubiquitous Tilbury, and that he should be accompanied by a diminutive groom called a tiger, who sat up on the back seat with folded arms and tried to emulate the arrogance of expression of his master. He was usually no more than 9 or 10 years old, since he must not exceed 3 feet in height. He had to have iron nerves and to be as agile as a squirrel, to be ready to spring down from his perch at the call of his master. He usually drank and was adept at swearing. It was fashionable at that time for the tiger to be Irish and to be called Paddy or Timmy. It was also an advantage if he were known to be vicious or depraved. Great writing there. The story becomes more and more sad as it goes on, as I said, but Starkie's main motivation for writing the biography is not just to throw light on Borel's life and work, but also because he was a formative influence on Baudelaire. So if you're interested in Baudelaire, you may find this book rewarding. So there we have it. That's my reading for February. But before I go, I should nominate my book of the month, and it is, surprise, surprise, Daniel Paul Schreber's Memoirs of My Nervous Illness. Absolutely superb. I can't recommend it enough. Go and order a copy now. All right, I've said my piece. All that remains is for me to bid you farewell in the customary fashion. So, until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.